This chapter covers 3 or 4 miscellaneous topics that didn't fit in very good in the other chapters. This first lesson is going to talk about variable scope. And we've already looked a little bit at variable scope when we talked about passing method arguments by value and by reference. And we'll cover that again as part of talking about scope, but we're also going to look at 2 other levels of scope, block scope and class level or global scope. So let's start at the bottom and talk about block scope. Block scope refers to the fact that when you declare a variable inside a block, the scope or the lifetime or the visibility of that variable is only within that block. Let me give you a very good example that's simple to understand. We have a for loop and we introduce a loop control variable j. So here we'll have simply a loop that loops through 100 and it writes out the value of j. And hit the semicolon right here. You see I've got an error under the j. And let's take a look at that. The name j does not exist in the current context. And what that means is that within this block, this for loop block, and it's a block even though we don't put curly braces around it, that is the scope of the variable j. Once we finish the loop, then the compiler gets rid of or erases from memory completely the variable j and its value, so that when we try to reference it outside the block, it says the name j does not exist. We can even do that within just a standard block that we write in code. We don't do this very often in programs, or at least in the programs I've shown you in this course. It's going to be very hard to get the value a in here. Maybe I can do it like this, because IntelliSense can't find a. So once again, here's a block, started with a curly brace, ended with another curly brace. Then we try to write out the value of a, and again we get the same error message. The name a does not exist in the current context. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about block level scope. And that's why when I write a for loop, I always declare the variable, the loop control variable, inside the loop. Because I don't want I, or whatever my loop control variable is, I don't want its value to exist outside the body of the loop. So that's an example of block level scope. The next level up from that is what we call local scope. In local scope, we've seen several instances of that. For example, when I declare a variable in static void main, that variable becomes local to main. If I try to access that variable outside of main, let's say in another method, we'll just call this test method because I can't think of a better name for it. Again, notice IntelliSense won't let me write a because it doesn't recognize it. The name a does not exist in the current context. That is because this version of a is local to the main method. And we saw that earlier when we talked about passing arguments by value and by reference. When I pass an argument by value to a method, then that variable is like we created a new one. And its value is only referenced inside the method call. Once I move outside the method call, then that value is gone, the parameter is gone, and I don't have access to that value or even the variable itself. The last example of scope is global scope. What I'm going to do here is put console write a inside. Oh, it's going to be hard to do. Let me do it like this. I'll put the a inside there. So now you see that in both main and in test method, a is inaccessible. But if I declare a at a global level, or at class level is sometimes also called, to be able to declare a in a global way, I have to make it a static variable outside of void main. Once I've done that, notice that the errors for a in main and the a in test method are gone. Why? Because now I've declared a as a global or class level variable, and any part of the class has access to that variable. So to sum up here, the reference to j in this example is example of block level scope. If I introduce a new variable in a method, then we'll call this local scope. A is accessible while I'm in the method definition, and that includes any method including main. So that's considered local scope. And then finally, when I declare a variable outside of main at the class level or global, then that means that variable has class level or global scope, and it's accessible anywhere within the class or the main program. So those are the three major levels of scope. As you become more experienced with programming, you'll understand more about scoping and how to control it. But now we're ready to move on to the next miscellaneous topic, where we're going to talk about working with strings.